This is a story from when I was about 6 or 7. One of my old neighbors used to babysit some kids my age on the summers. Since they were about my age and the only boys on the street, I would always go over to see them. My neighbor's house is right on the edge of a small forested area, and there are tons of trees and areas to hide in. There was also a small path cutting right through the wooded area, so sometimes people would go through my neighbor's yard to get to it. One time I was playing with all my friends in my neighbor's yard, and when I looked over at one of the trees, I saw a dark black figure. Black as in like a shadow, standing beside it. The figure was pitch black. No facial features, no clothes, nothing. And he wasn't like see-through like a shadow is. He was pure black. He ducked behind the tree before I could get a better look. I told my mom about it, but she didn't think much of it since I was so young. A few months later, I was riding my bike past my neighbor's house. I looked over at the trees and, sure enough, he was there. I stared at him for a moment before looking back in front of me, hit the curb and then scraped my knee. When I looked back, he was gone again. This is the last story I have about him. About a year after I first saw him, me and my sister were in my backyard playing on our playset. All of a sudden, I heard my mom yelling for me to grab my sister and come inside. My sister at the time was like 3 or 4 years old. I grabbed her and ran back in, but just before I got inside, I glanced over at the fence, and there he was, staring at me and my sister. I asked my mom why she called us in, and she told us it was because she saw the man too and thought that he was some creep or something. She described it exactly as I had. Then I never saw him again. Nowadays, I still don't know if it was some kind of spirit or just some type of creepy dude that I happened to see multiple times. My sister was too young to really remember him, but me and my mom still talk about it to this day. The OP added an edit. Tonight I was talking to my mom about the Shadow Man, and she told me that one time she was pulling out of our driveway, and she saw him in our other neighbor's yard. She didn't tell me this originally because she was afraid that it would scare me. What follows occurred in 2005, when I was going through a very messy and painful, for me anyway, divorce. In looking back, I remember fighting so hard and for so long to keep together a situation which was a lost cause for years. I set the stage this way to help you, the reader, understand that, for months as this dragged on, I was not in a good place at all. And so it was on a certain night, after another day of too many cigarettes and far too much dark anguish, that I laid there waiting to go to sleep. Sleep was difficult during this time for me, but at some point I did fall asleep, and at some point the following experience happened. I found myself standing in about a foot of fresh snow, which at the time I thought was really interesting since it was summer in the waking world. The dream was lucid, which isn't rare for me, in that I remember looking behind me and there were no footsteps in the snow. I did not walk there. It was night, and based on the enormous tree line surrounding me that I could make out in the moonlight, I was in the middle of some vast forest. In front of me was a small cabin, lit from the inside with smoke trailing from the chimney. It was then that I started to feel the cold, so I walked up to it. I knocked on the door and was shocked when my father answered the door. He had died in 2000, and we were extremely close. I couldn't believe it, and for a few moments it was hugs and tears, and somehow I had all these pictures of my daughters in my pocket all of a sudden. So I was taking them out and showing him, telling him stories. He was patiently smiling, but I could tell that he was listening for my benefit. And it soon set in that he had seen every one of these moments of me and my kids. He had seen everything, and I still hold on to this day that he watches over my girls, and now his new great-granddaughter. something struck me as odd once I began taking all this in. My dad was not the rustic type. In fact, he hated camping. And looking around, I could see the place was filled with books, so that it made it comfortable, but this didn't really feel like his place, if you catch my drift. I must have mentioned that because I watched his face change into something a bit more somber and he answered, "It's because I don't really belong here. I'm supposed to be somewhere else." I didn't understand what he meant, and he must have read it on my face. He went on, "I'm here for you, son. I came here to this place to help you. But we're running out of time. You're here because I have something to show you." In the next instant, we were back in the snow, behind the cabin. The moon was really bright, I remember, because I could see pretty clearly. We were standing in front of this gigantic kennel with a high fence all around it. I was confused. It was then that I could see two large shadows moving in the shadows at the back. I began to hear the sounds they were making, and I will never forget it. It was like a growl and a whine at the same time. I think they sensed who I was, or something, because they shot forward into the light, and I saw them for the first time. There were two huge black wolves, but they were so horrible looking. They were so enraged and at the same time so sick. Their hair was matted in filth and gone altogether in sickly patches, with bloody spots where they had bitten themselves or each other. They were throwing themselves at the fence, almost blindly to get at me. I remember they were biting at the fence until their mouths were bloody. Once or twice they bumped into each other, and then they would immediately tangle in the bloody, violent fight. Dark blood fell on the snow. Somehow I knew this must have been going on for a very long time. The whole scene was so frightening and so repulsive and so confusing. Again, this sort of thing was so out of character for my dad, who loved animals. I asked him why he was doing this. Why are you keeping these things around? I remember my dad's face. So kind, but pained too, I could see. He said, "Son, don't you understand? This is what I'm here for. In the middle of nowhere, hidden away out here, I'm here to help you." He motioned to the kennel. "These two wolves are your anger and your fear, and they are tearing everything apart. I came here to keep them here, to keep you safe, but son, I can't hold them here any longer. You can't hold them here any longer. They will destroy everything. You aren't going to live much longer like this." I stood there in silence. Even the wolves had fallen silent, and I wanted to cry. All of it came into view, the beating myself up, the huge toll it was taking on me, my mental and physical health, all coming up to the point where I was actually facing my own death. I knew that part to be true. I would be dead within days. All of it was because someone didn't love me. But what was actually doing the most damage, what was killing me, was that I refused to love myself. I could tell by my dad's face that he saw me coming to this realization, and he smiled in relief. "Are you ready?" he asked. I was terrified they would attack me, but I knew there was no choice. With the whole world watching, it felt like I walked up with as much courage as I had and flung open the gate. With that growling whine that was deafening, the wolves leapt out of the kennel, finally free. They stood there for a moment, locking eyes with me, their hair standing on end. For a second I thought they were going to kill me, payment for keeping them in a cage. And then finally, without a look back, they charged together into the forest. Where they went, I don't know. I remember looking at my dad, not knowing what to do next. There were no more words, just a feeling that the experience was over. I knew that this place would never be here again for me, but my father would, which was more than enough. And it was then that I woke up. It was early morning. I felt mentally and physically drained, somehow not the same, but there was also a knowing that the worst was behind me, that I was not going to die yet. The wolves were released. Day by day, I slept better. As the moving day approached, I found myself looking forward to a new life. My girls and I had the best adventures when we were together, great memories we talk about to this day. I owe much of that turning point to my dad, who put himself in a cabin in the middle of some nowhere to keep me from tearing myself apart. So, this will be a short story that might not even be paranormal. I was only 8 years old, and my brain might have played a light trick on me, or I hallucinated. Anyway, on to the story. As I mentioned before, I was 8 years old, and was staying at home while my parents were at the store. It was daytime. I was sitting in a chair and reading a book. Now, my living room is directly in the line of sight from said chair, and it's divided by this small pillar wall up the middle as a separate dining area. So as I was saying, I was reading a book, and for some reason I decided to look up from said book. Behind the pillar appeared to be a weird, humanoid-looking figure that I couldn't quite make out. It appeared to be docile, and it was just staring at me. I freaked out and proceeded to shut my door and sit in front of it until my parents got home. Of course, I didn't find a thing. Also, my home was built when we bought the land, so it couldn't be someone who died at the house. After that, I didn't experience a single paranormal happening in my house or elsewhere. Now, as I was saying, this might have been my child brain playing tricks on me or a hallucination, but it still scares me sometimes. Because of this, I also got into the paranormal and cryptids. Do you have any idea what it might have been? The paranormal has been a major part of my life for as long as I can remember. My first experience happened when I was just a couple months old. Clearly, I don't remember it, but my dad does. And I had my first memorable experience when I was about 6. Things seemed to follow me. Or maybe I just ended up in the right place at the right time. Whatever the case, I've had more experiences in 26 years than most people will have in their lifetime. A large chunk of those experiences happened at my dad's house. It's a tiny 5-room bungalow built in the late 30s or early 40s, metal siding, a small attic, and an even smaller root cellar with an eerie crawl space. It sits on about half an acre of land in a small town. Quite frankly, it has a strong, foreboding vibe all of its own. Beyond the backyard is a small cornfield. Beyond that are woods with a small swamp running through it. The swamp has some stories of its own from what I remember. My dad bought the place when I was about 15. I wasn't as excited about moving out of a rusted ancient trailer as I should have been. Dad had spent 2 or 3 years looking for an actual house for us. We must have looked at 40 houses in that time, some better and prettier than the bungalow. The first question he asked me the day we started moving our stuff was, "What do you think? Is this place haunted?" I said, "I don't know, but something feels weird." I moved in with him full time when I was 18. Divorced parents, shared custody. That was when things started to get spooky. 1, it wasn't long after Dad bought the place that things started happening, although he didn't tell me about them until I started experiencing them. I'd often smell a smoky, floral perfume moving throughout the house. Sometimes it just smelled like roses. It never stayed in one spot. Dad said he smelled it a lot. Sometimes it was so strong that it actually woke him up. 2, footsteps. Lots of them. 3, movement in the attic. There's only one way into the attic, a drop-down door above where my bed used to be. Some nights I'd hear walking, stomping, and furniture being dragged up there. However, there was no proper floor up there. If you ever watched National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and can remember the attic scene, you'll know what I'm talking about. 4, I used to want to be a singer, so I would spend a lot of my time alone, which was most of the time, trying to build up my confidence and train my voice by singing loudly. One day, I sang a song pretty damn well, and when I finished, I heard a hearty clapping coming from my bedroom. I just paused and said, "Thank you." Eventually, more advanced spooky things started happening. The first event I remember was in the middle of a beautiful, bright day. I was folding laundry in my bedroom when I heard a large dog barking in the house. I went out to look, thinking one of my neighbor's pit bulls had gotten in. They had tried to before because they think every house is theirs. Not logical now, but at the same time, that was my only thought. When I got out there was no dog. Nothing was out of place except the dryer was open. I always closed it because the open door blocked the back door too much. It was also hard to open and had to be slammed shut. The moment I saw the door was when the voices started. Male, female, young, old. They started as a collective whisper that came from every wall in the house and progressed to a mix of whispers, talking, yelling, screaming, and then crying. The only place it didn't come from was my room, as I found out from running there and curling into the fetal position on my bed. I could hear them from behind my door, and soon, it sounded like the voices had all congregated right there, trying to get to me, only to be stopped by a flimsy accordion door. I put my hands over my ears and cried. Eventually, I started praying and reciting Psalm 23. I wasn't even that religious at the time. After reciting the psalm, the voices stopped and I went calm, immediately before falling asleep for an hour or so. After I woke up, I went to my friend's house down the road. Her mother hates me to this day, and thinks I'm a demon-possessed heathen. She didn't think too highly of the story I had. The second event involved the band. I've only seen it once. To get to the only bathroom, you have to go through my dad's bedroom. His bed is right beside the door, and he has under-the-bed storage drawers. One day, I walked in there and saw that one of the drawers was half open, and he never kept his drawers open. As I walked past, a pale gray, long, emaciated arm shot through the drawer and tried to grab me with spindly fingers. I instinctively jumped over it and went to the bathroom like I had seen nothing. I figured it was better to not let whatever that was know that I was afraid of it. A couple days later, I was telling my dad about the arm. I went into his room, which is next to the dining room, and tried to sort of recreate the event. Dad has a corner curio cabinet with a mirrored back in his room. I stood near the bed and looked over at the curio cabinet and saw a woman standing behind me. She was white, not Caucasian white, just pure snow white. Her skin, hair, eyes, even her dress, all one even tone. Her hair was up in an antique bun style, but her dress looked to be a plain style dress from the late 1800s. While I tried not to let the hand event scare me, this woman drove me over my line. I screamed and started crying. This was my second or third time seeing a full-body apparition, but it was the first time I had ever been so frightened by one. Dad came in, and obviously no one was there. Seeing her was what really started the worst of it. She would end up being a major player in all of this. Sometime between the first meeting her and the most horrifying event involving her, I got a dog. Her name is Ferris, and she's my baby. She had a hard time adjusting, so I spent a lot of time at night with her by my side as I watched movies by myself. Dad worked long hours and was often in bed by 8, so I always closed the French doors between the living room and the dining room to keep the noise down. A few days after adopting Ferris, I noticed that she would look over at the doors and growl. I ignored it for a week or so, chalked it up to her adjusting. Then one night I looked over and really wished that I hadn't. On the other side of the room were hands pressed firmly against the lower panes of glass and figures low to the ground, moving in a slithery, almost slimy way. I couldn't make out the detail, but somehow the images of decomposing bodies writhing in pain on the floor came to mind. Instead of freaking out, I turned up the TV volume and just watched my movie, all the while glancing over at the figures behind the door. They didn't leave the entire time I was out there. I'd seen them a few times afterwards, but they eventually went away. Ferris always let me know when they were there. They also never left handprints. Then there was Quasimodo. I don't know who or what he was, but I only had ever saw him in the reflection of a full wood and glass curio cabinet that my dad had sitting on top of the TV stand in the living room. He was mostly shadowy, although I could make out certain details like the cut and color of his hair, his hunched back, and twisted arms. The first time I saw him, I looked over at the curio cabinet as I walked through the room and saw him walking closely behind me. It made me jump, but I didn't feel afraid like the white woman did. He didn't stick around long. I really wish he could have taken her place. There was a time when our sump pump malfunctioned and the root cellar flooded. I was awoken by my dad yelling up from beneath the floors, "We've got a major problem down here." I was a bit upset that he woke me up like that, as if he thought I had some broke appliance spidey sense that should have woken me up hours ago just as the pump broke. I asked him later why he woke me up like that. He said, "Woke you up? I heard you walking around upstairs before I even said anything." And we both got a chill from that one. Now for the long story, the day of absolute hell. I hadn't slept well that night. I woke up around 4 a.m. I know this because I could hear my dad out in the kitchen making coffee before he went to work. I'd been woken up to the feeling of someone's entire hand covering my face, using their fingertips to grip it tight. I laid still for a while and just hoped it was a dream. Sleep paralysis, maybe? But I could move, and when I looked up at the wall, I saw something so incredibly surreal. I used to have a beautiful handmade yarn shawl that I got at a thrift store. I kept it hung up on my wall because it was so beautifully made that I considered it a work of art. Popping out of the neck hole of the shawl was a human head. It was pale gray, had dark, almost childlike features, but there was something just so menacing about it. I stared at the head for a long time. It stared back at me expressionless and only blinked a couple of times. I eventually heard my dad leave and I ran to turn on the light. I never broke eye contact with the head and it never broke eye contact with me. Just like something out of a cheesy horror movie, the moment I turned on the light, the head was gone. I tried going back to sleep with the lights on, but I couldn't. I sat out in the living room and watched TV until about 7 a.m. About that time, I felt like my heart was being crushed from within my chest. I saw a pale, transparent figure standing in front of me with its hands to my chest. I recognized it as the white woman and tried to get up. Somehow, she held me down. I reached for my phone to call my mom, but for some reason the call wouldn't go through. Text would go through, though. I sent my mom a play-by-play of what was going on and told her how scared I was and that I thought this woman was trying to kill me. Of course she was. I used to have screenshots of the text I sent my mom, but they became lost after an old phone I kept them on died. The white woman vanished just like I felt like I was going to pass out. Maybe die. I got out of my chair and ran outside. One of my neighbors was at her car, about to go to work. She knew we believed the house was haunted, but she never judged us for it. So I ran to her and told her what was going on. She tried to calm me down and told me everything would be okay. She said to call her if anything else happened, and she would pick me up and take me back to work with her. I went back inside and just immediately regretted it. Walking past my dad's room gave me a terrible feeling. I peeked inside and saw the woman standing in the corner with her back towards me, her chest and shoulders heaving as if she was taking long, labored but silent breaths. I didn't stick around. I grabbed my purse and keys and ran back outside just before my neighbor was about to go to work. I frantically told her what I saw. If there was any doubt in her mind, it was gone now. She saw how stressed and terrified I was. She walked over to look at the house and then turned to look at me. Behind her, I saw a woman's face staring at me through the kitchen window. I shrieked and watched as the face quickly ducked back to my right. The direction she moved was illogical since there's a cabinet, sink, and a wall there. Sometimes I wonder if she left the house for a moment. My neighbor explained to her bosses and coworkers that I was with her because I had some home issues and needed to get out of there. I'm sure they all thought I was on drugs just by looking at me. I was a sleep-deprived mess dressed in mismatched clothing and slippers. At one point, I tried sleeping on the couch in the lobby, but I couldn't sleep. I tried sleeping in the conference room and still couldn't sleep. I wandered the building for a while and eventually made my way to an unused cubicle across from my neighbor's. The rest of that day is a blur. Things sort of calmed down after that. There were small experiences here and there, footsteps and smells. I moved out shortly after that for various reasons. I've only been back twice. Dad says those small things happen from time to time, but nothing big. My experiences in general have slowed down. Maybe it's because I'm not seeking anything out. Maybe it's the stress of the tangible world overshadowing anything that may try to show itself to me. Sometimes I miss it, but most of the time I look back at all the otherworldly BS I've seen and think, nah, I'm good. I have a lot more experiences outside of that house that I may write about. I'm hoping this won't get too long, considering there isn't much depth to this story. At my high school, we have an old stage and a new one. Not going to disclose the name for privacy reasons. The older one doesn't really get used much since the construction of the new one, and is actually getting bulldozed this summer. Now, there have been rumors of both stages being haunted for as long as I've known. I know upperclassmen who swear they saw an old woman sitting up on the catwalk, but when they went to check it out, no one was there. The old stage is where my story takes place. During some free time one day, me and a few other friends went to investigate the old stage. We were messing around in the costume area, backstage in the sound booth. We even pulled out a cheap ghost tracker app just for fun. Keep in mind that this was all during the school day, but it almost got pitch black in there. We started to leave, and the people that got to the doors first held them open for us, so that allowed a little bit of light to come in. As we were walking back up the rows of seats to leave, I saw something out of the corner of my left eye. It looked like a woman on all fours quickly crawling toward me. Now, this wasn't a normal crawl. It was practically a sprint on her hands and feet. She had dark, messy hair and ragged clothing. I quickly did a double take and she was gone. Normally, I would say I just got in the spirit of things and tried to convince myself I saw something, but the way my heart jumped, I know that can't be the case. I don't know what I saw there, but it scared me more than anything else ever has. Hey there, friends. I hope you enjoyed this collection of spine-chilling ghost stories. If you did, please do consider hitting that thumbs up button. And if you really liked this video and would like more content like this, please do consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button and that little bell next to it, and then you are part of the Nevermore and are notified of all videos that I post when I post them. Other parts of the Nevermore include my Patreon, my Ko-fi, my Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, and I think that's it. However, there is also a page where you can submit a story to the Nevermore, and it may be featured on my channel. It will be featured on my channel if you submit it to me, just saying. All that said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope you're doing well out there. Here, it's, really dark and rainy, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys next time. Y'all have a fantastic week. Yeah, but until then, sleep well.